A layman treads diffidently in a domain inhabited by men and women accustomed to walk on the razor's edge of acute analysis on matters of critical importance. I am nevertheless emboldened by your hospitality and the suggestion that there may be some benefit in sharing perceptions. Those charged with the responsibility of ensuring national security in any state are confronted with three questions. Firstly, what is the threat? Secondly, who is to be protected? And thirdly, what are the means for it available? An Indian strategic thinker of the 3rd century BC, bearing the name Kautilya, dwelt on the subject of threats that states encounter and developed a typology. 1. Those threats of external origin and internal abatement. 2. Those threats of internal origin and external abatement. 3. Those threats of external origin and external abatement. And 4. Those of internal origin and internal abatement. He added that of these 4 kinds of dangers, internal dangers should be got rid of first, for it is the internal troubles, like the fear from being a lurking snake, that are more serious than external troubles. For Kautilya, the wealth of a nation was defined in terms of both the territory of the state and of its residents. His approach to security imperatives anticipated by 2000 years the notion of human security enunciated by Obuchi Kaizo and Amartya Sen, who defined it, and I quote, "The key idea in comprehensively seizing all the menaces that threaten the survival, daily life, and dignity of human beings, and to strengthen the efforts to confront these threats." End of quote. Despite the progress humankind has recorded, warlike privations, diseases, and ignorance has been far from eliminated. This is borne out by estimates suggesting that mortality caused by conflict increased dramatically from 1.6 million in the 16th century to nearly 10 million in the 20th century. An eminent American strategic thinker described the 20th century as a period of mega deaths and meta myths, spawned false notions of total control derived from arrogant assertions of total righteousness. Friends, the decline in the interstate warfare in the first decade and a half of the present century has been coupled with an increase in lower intensity internal civil conflicts. Consequently, the idea of security has expanded beyond the traditional sphere of military security, which had primarily been concerned with the defending the borders of a country from invading enemy, conventionally cast in terms of application of force by the state. There is a growing recognition that security of any given society is also impacted by several non-military factors, including political, economic, environmental, social, and human domains. This emerging paradigm of security was aptly articulated by the former Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Kofi Annan, and I quote him, "We must broaden our view of what is meant by peace and security. Peace means much more than the absence of war. Human security can no longer be understood in purely military terms. Rather, it must encompass economic development, social justice, environmental protection, democratization, disarmament, and respect for human rights and the rule of law." End of quote. Much the same holistic approach was put forth by Barry Buzan, some of you might be familiar with his writings, who considered 5 segments of security: political, military, economic, societal, and environmental, and how they impacted the less developed periphery based on changes in the more developed center. Each defines a focal point within the security problematic and a way of ordering priorities, but all are woven together in a strong web of linkage. These complex interactions between the various security dimensions create the context for today's security agenda. The trends for the next 20 to 50 years point to a bleak picture. One where the worsening effects of climate change are likely to contribute to economic deprivation, which in turn could lead to conflict and forced migrations, and where networks will become increasingly more important than territories. It is in this context that the centers of higher military learning, such as yours, derive their importance. Policy making in most countries is often reactive. Governments are driven by deadlines and events. Proactive planning is needed to anticipate the strategic problems, highlight trends, develop scenarios, and suggest policy options before crises overtake us. As you are aware, the traditional approach to security is state-centric, and for good reasons. The raison d'etre of statehood is provision of security to its citizens and to a lesser extent its residents in both its internal and external dimensions. The post-Second World War global order was premised on states acting as net security generators and providers, and thereby contributing to systemic stability. The experience of the last 7 decades, and especially since the end of the Cold War, shows that real life veers quite significantly away from the textbook assumptions. Many of the states have radiated insecurity towards their citizens and residents, and thus destabilized their own societies and polities. This has led to state failures and implosion in the internal dimension, and to regional and even global crises in the external dimension. One cannot escape the harsh conclusion that states have, quite often, been significant contributors to individual and systemic insecurity. Going beyond the traditional security paradigm, the ambit of discussion does not remain confined to maintenance of state sovereignty and territorial integrity. Once we begin to address other threats, 2 characteristics rapidly emerge. We find, in the first place, that the initiating actors and eventual recipients are states as well as individuals and groups. And secondly, because the latter do not always fall within the ambit of a single state, therefore it necessitates departures from the traditional structure of command and compliance. The latter, in effect, would often depend upon demonstrated good rather than its a priori acceptance. Both together necessitate a paradigm shift. Another aspect is the nature and diversity of challenges. These include pandemics and all matters relating to environment and climate change. Together, they demonstrate the inefficacy of unilateral action and the imperative of a comprehensive and cooperative approach. The terms of this cooperation and their equity remains work in progress. The task, ladies and gentlemen, of defining and implementing a security paradigm is far more challenging in democratic, pluralist, developing societies with heterogeneous populations having diversities of religion, ethnicity, and languages. For democratic societies, the measure of security is derived from the perspective of the lowest common denominator, the well-being of the citizen or the individual. People need to feel secure both at the individual and community levels. If they feel they are victims of economic deprivation, neglect, and negative politics, they lose their faith in the state. When we look at countries with such similarities, India and Nigeria come to the fore. Both our countries are linked by common historical experiences of the colonial rule and in the contemporary context are united in the desire to work towards democratic pluralism with the core values of liberty, equality and tolerance while seeking economic development and social justice for their people. Our main concern, therefore, should be to establish the credibility and the legitimacy of the state and its institutions. Aberrations must be resolved in a transparent manner and just fashion, as public perceptions are important. Management of ethnic and communal conflicts and resolving them are important areas of governance, as are the identification of threats posed by religious fundamentalism, ethnic violence, economic disparities, and deprivation. These challenges can no longer be ignored, particularly when globalization and information technology can make changes fast, furious, and most unexpected. As developing nations with global aspirations, both Nigeria and India face similar security challenges ranging from climate change and diverse societal needs, which have been compounded by the spread of terror and newer fora of insecurity in our regions. A former Indian Prime Minister defined a framework for addressing these challenges, and I quote him, "Democracies provide legitimate means for expressing dissent. They provide the right to engage in political activity and must continue to do so. However, and for this very reason, they cannot afford to be soft on terror. Terrorism exploits the freedom of our open societies and to destroy our freedoms. End of quote. Today, the biggest threat to international peace and to the sovereignty of states is terrorism. Kautilya called it secret war. No cause justifies the indiscriminate killing of innocent civilians as a means to achieve political goals or change of policies. Terrorism is one of the most egregious sources of human rights violations and has become a major impediment to development. Your country, like mine, has suffered the horrors of this scourge of humanity. Terrorism today has global reach. No city remains safe. There is a new level of threat to pluralist and open societies. The use of terrorism as an instrument of state policy is to be unequivocally condemned. There can be no distinction between good and bad terrorists. A terrorist is a terrorist. One who commits crimes against humanity cannot have any religion or be afforded any political sanctuary. International terrorism can only be defeated by organized international action. We need to restructure the international legal framework such as by adopting a comprehensive convention on international terrorism. Societies that stand for peace and humanity have to increase their cooperation and strengthen efforts to prevent the supply of arms to terrorists, disrupt terrorist movements, and curb and criminalize terrorist financing. We have to help each other by sharing intelligence, securing our cyberspace, and minimizing the use of internet and social media for terrorist activities. Friends, our long-standing defense partnership is symbolized by institutions such as the Nigerian Defense Academy at Kaduna, the Naval College at Port Harcourt, and other elite military training establishments in Nigeria. Many illustrious Nigerian officers have been the flag bearers of our bilateral cooperation. Today, we have an Indian Army officer present amongst you as a participant of the ongoing NDC course. This augurs well for our cooperation in the future. Considering the diverse security challenges of our times, stronger India-Nigeria relations would not only be mutually beneficial, but would also add to regional and global security. Together, we stand as giants of Africa and Asia respectively, and as we march ahead in our quest for economic and military security, collaborative efforts born out of mutual trust can be leveraged effectively to achieve our strategic goals. We must also find ways of using international opinion as a force multiplier. No country in the world, however powerful, can counter the emergent threats unilaterally. This, therefore, makes diplomacy doubly important for developing economies such as ours. Effective diplomacy is an important alternative to excessive defense spending. Therefore, it is important to devise methods of effectively participating in international fora, in influencing world opinion, and striving to make such mechanisms more representative, more consensual, and more effective. I thank you for inviting me here today and wish you well in your future endeavors. Long live Nigeria-India friendship. Thank you.